You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth 96.3 FM. I have the pleasure of being joined via the power of Zoom by Dan Jenkins. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Luke. How's it going?
Going well.
Thanks for having me on.
Cool. So, Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Well, my name's Dan, as you astutely pointed out. I go by the name LIONFIGHT, all one word, all caps. No one ever gets that right. That's okay. I am a music producer and solo artist based in Manchester.
Nice. Okay, so how did you get into music in the first place? Do you come from a musical family? Was it just something you saw a guitar, picked it up and went from there?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, my mum's very musical, and my dad loves his blues music,
Nice.
but doesn't necessarily play anything. I grew up, funnily enough, playing the trumpet. That was like my main thing for about 10 years, actually. I played from being a kid all the way through to I think I was about 18 when I finally decided to put the trumpet down and pick up the guitar instead. So I grew up playing in orchestras and brass bands, learning music theory and all that stuff. But really, there was always an itch to explore other kinds of music. And for a long time, I wanted to kind of explore rock music and metal. And I picked up the guitar when I was 18. I started learning drums as well a bit before that. And kind of really found, actually, this is the kind of music that is my core language, I suppose, heavy rock and metal. And so that coincided for me at the same time as when I started learning to produce music. So first opened Logic Pro on a Mac when I was about 17 years old. I was studying it in college. It's funny, I obviously been musical my whole life. I've also been just a proper computer nerd, total dweeb. And so I went to college and I studied music and I studied computing. And I saw on the list of subjects that you could study this thing called music technology. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds like it could be a good crossover. Turned out it was the perfect, crossing point for my two main interests. And just really fell in love with making music, not just playing it and performing it and writing it, but actually turning it into a song, an audio file that can be played on the radio or streamed, and everything that goes into producing a song. I realized I just have a real passion for. So ever since then, I've been working away on my computer making tunes. I went to study music technology at university, where I learned all around kind of the science and engineering more than anything around acoustics and electronics and programming for audio, which I just found super, super interesting. Not necessarily useful for writing music and producing it as much, but and then I've been working for the last 5 or so years full-time, making music, producing music, and as part of that, developing my own solo project, LIONFIGHT.
Cool. So did the music production kind of come first and then you thought, oh, actually, I'd like to be on the other side and do a bit of have my own solo stuff and be parts of bands and things? Or was it the opposite way around, you were doing the music itself and then going, oh, I'd like to be on the other side?
Yeah, the good question. To us, the probably annoying answer is they both developed together quite a bit. But I suppose if I had to choose, I was playing music in bands, brass bands my whole life. Yeah. Always wanted to be in a rock band, never was. I don't know if I just didn't have the right people around me or whether I was just making an excuse by saying that. But, I was playing in orchestras, brass band. I enjoyed writing music. Didn't necessarily have the means how to until I, 1, picked up the guitar, and 2, picked up music production. At least a means to write the music that I felt I could express myself with and spoke to me. I didn't quite hit the right spot writing stuff for my brass band. But yeah, when I started figuring out how to play guitar, I started figuring out how to get it all in the computer and put it all together and add instruments and synths and drums and all that stuff. That was really when that passion came alive for me. And I think, to be honest, more so now than performing. I enjoy making music for other artists as well, and writing. And that's, I love performing, but it's not the phase of life that I'm in right now.
Nice.
But yeah, so they kind of both grew together, really. It felt like things came together and aligned for me to have a means to express, obviously, like how I feel and like my experiences, and like get my ideas out as well. So yeah, kind of all lined up neatly.
Yeah, I know. Very nice. So your solo project, you go by the name LIONFIGHT. How did that come about? Did you just decide to give yourself a cool name, or is there a bit of a story behind?
I deliberated on that name for a very long time, and I went through a couple different names and like made myself little logos and whatever along the way. The reason LIONFIGHT stuck is because, well, it's based out of Genesis 32 in the Bible, where Jacob wrestles with a man who I think most people would agree represents God in some way or another. And he wrestles all night, and then as the morning comes, they have this weird interaction where the man's like, oh, I gotta go, and he's like, oh, well, not until you bless me. And then after that whole interaction, he's left like limping. And there's lots of things you can get out of that chapter of Genesis that is outside of the scope of this interview, probably, and I'm probably left to better theologians than myself. But for me, it really spoke to me about like wrestling with God and wrestling with faith. And I think certainly at the time when I was trying to think of a name, the idea of fighting with God, I almost saw it as like quite a holy cause, and not in a just throwing my toys out of the pram way, but being like, no, but I want to wrestle to have you at the center of my life. Sometimes that's hard, and I want to wrestle to understand you properly. And so, you know, it's probably people have connected the dots already, but a lion is obviously often a symbol for God. And so for me, the name LIONFIGHT, I was like, well, that sounds freaking heavy metal. That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
And it made sense of at least, you know, where I was when I was trying to come up with a name, that I wanted to write music that expressed how I felt, even if it was angry sometimes, even if I was angry at God or I was angry at things I was going through in life. That name explains why I feel able to express that anger even publicly by releasing music. Because I feel like from Genesis 32 and other points in the Bible, it seems like it's okay to be open about that, to be open about not being happy sometimes. And sometimes that unhappiness is directed at God, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, so we shall break to some music now, and be right back with more with Dan in a bit. Welcome back. That was The End of the Line by LIONFIGHT, who I have in the studio with me. Hi, Dan.
Hey.
So, tell us about the new song. At time of recording, this has been your latest release, I guess. Tell us about the song.
Yeah, The End of the Line, obviously it's really personal to me, and it's really vulnerable. But at its core, it's about allowing myself to sit with the questions that scare me, and about how that can actually be quite lonely, because people don't always understand where you're coming from, and it can make people uncomfortable. I'll do my best to explain the process that went into this song. See, I feel like everyone has, you know, their take on suffering and like hardships, and why God can feel distant or even absent at times, right? It's questions we all ask, and it's questions we talk about a lot in the church. And but here's the thing: a few years ago, I don't know about you, but I got quite fatigued with, I'm going to say the Christian buzzword, deconstruction.
Yeah.
And it was just, everyone was talking about it. And to be honest, I found a lot of the discourse actually really unhelpful, because when that word came into my vocabulary, it actually gave language to something I felt like I was already going through, but also something I didn't choose or didn't want.
Okay, yeah,
couldn't help, but it was something I was going through, and everyone had their opinion on it from like an external point of view. And I felt like I was asking, you know, the fundamental questions that we all ask about, you know, who is God? Is he real? If he is, does he love me? Who am I? Is the Bible like authoritative? Like, can I trust what it says about Jesus? Who is Jesus? You know, all those really good questions that I'm sure we've all asked, but I found myself asking those questions on a new and deeper level that I'd never had to do before. And it was deeply uncomfortable to kind of admit to myself that I was thinking about this stuff and I was asking these questions, and admit that I might not come back from this. Like, I have to put everything out on the table. And, you know, people around me were saying, it felt like I was hearing from people I knew and from sermons and for like Christian figures that were talking on the topic. A couple of unhelpful things for me going through that process. Probably the best example I can think of is, I heard someone say, it's okay to question scripture as long as you come at it knowing it's authoritative.
Okay.
And for me, that felt a bit like an oxymoron. It's like, but how can I truly question it if I've already reached my conclusion?
Yeah.
And I understand why people say that, because, you know, you have to approach scripture kind of with goodwill, and it's a good thing to expect to get something out of it, right? And it's you can't rebuild your theology every time you pray. That's unrealistic. Yeah. So I understand that. I understand where people are coming from, but for me, it's like, no, but I actually feel like I have to engage with this question on a level playing field. I can't ask about, for example, scripture, but already have my answer. If I'm going to be truly honest with myself, and it felt truly honest with God, I have to give this question a fighting chance, and that extends to all the other questions I mentioned about, you know, is God real? Does he love me? And the other thing that I found difficult about that whole period of everyone talking about deconstruction was people seem to think that you deconstruct because it's easier to leave faith than reconcile it. And I was there being like, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. You know, one of the hardest things you can do as a person is change your worldview. Yeah. Nobody wants to do it. We're incredibly resistant as a species to change our worldview because it's incredibly painful. It's incredibly hard. I mean, just look at politics. That's why that happens. It's so hard to cross the line and actually sit with someone on the other side and truly try and sit with their point of view. And I think the same can be said for faith. I didn't want to go through this process. I wasn't doing it because it was easy. I didn't want to do it because I wanted to become just like the world, or because it was easier to give up. But for me, it was something I had to do. And so I got to a point where I was like, if God's big enough, surely he can take my honest questions. Surely he doesn't need me to defend him by starting with the conclusion before I ask the question. And so this song, and to be honest, the rest of the singles that are going to be coming out soon, and the album that's going to follow it later this year, spoilers, it is uncomfortable. It sits in those questions, and actually it doesn't reach a conclusion, which is difficult for a lot of people. But I think that's okay, because I think that's what it takes to be honest with those questions and be real. And, you know, for example, Psalm 88 is one of a handful of psalms in the Bible that don't have a conclusion or a positive outcome. You know, most of the psalms that you know, David's like under siege, or the psalmist is like ill and go through like trying times, but then partway through it switches up and goes, but like, oh, but I know that you love me, or I see that you're still working in my life. That's how most psalms end, and that's, you know, that's great. But Psalm 88 ends with darkness is my only friend. That's the conclusion. Let's face it, that's blasphemous for a believer to say God, actually darkness is my only friend. That's akin to blasphemy. And to see that in the psalm, I actually felt understood, and I was like, okay, well, I feel like it's okay for me to express these things. And so actually this album, there may be points where you're listening to it and you think I've gone this way or I've gone that way. I've deliberately left it open, open-ended. And so all of that is to say, it's a major downer. It's not happy and fun, but if you're listening to this and you feel like you're missing something that no one else is, or like you're stood there and you can't engage in worship with your feelings like everyone else is in that moment, or you're listening to the sermon and you can't make sense with it in your head like everyone else is, I want you to know that's okay, that's part of being human. That's part of being real about faith and real about life. I don't have any answers, but come jam out to this song with me because I feel it too.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. We shall break for some more music and be back with Dan after this. We're back. I'm still joined in the studio by Dan Jenkins, otherwise known as LIONFIGHT. So Dan, in your kind of solo careers and music in general, how do you go about making your music? Are you the sort of person that has the lyrics first, or are you the sort of person that comes with the music first and then writes the songs, or some hybrid of the two, or some random fourth option?
Yeah, I'm going to give a really annoying answer and say that it's never the same way twice.
No, fair enough.
And there's not a lot of formula to it. I suppose in part it depends what kind of music I'm writing. The LIONFIGHT stuff, it's it's full band music, but it's just me.
Yeah.
So normally that will start with a guitar riff or a vocal hook that I'll come up with, and I'll try and form everything else around that. But obviously I do a lot of production for clients as well as a freelance music producer, and that means I kind of got to take care of everything from they send me a voice note of an idea all the way through to getting it ready to play on the radio or release on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever, and that can be in any form. I can get just a voice note from someone, or I can get a fully written top line to a backing track they found on YouTube that then obviously they can't use that backing track. I've got to do an entire production in a similar vein. So it's different every time, but one thing that I've found to be consistent in writing music, and this is a bit of a top tip, is just keep moving with it.
Yeah.
There's countless songs that haven't ever made it anywhere because I sat on it for too long, and it's one thing allowing an idea to mull, and that's that can be a good thing. It's another thing not making any moves on a track because you're afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
You just kind of got to go for it. And in my experience, the more music I make, the more I have ideas and processes and ways of doing things that I can rely on if I'm not feeling inspired, because 99% of the time I don't feel inspired.
Yeah.
It's hard work a lot of the time making music. And so like I say, sometimes it will just be a little idea that I've got to then try and make into a full track. And I do face the fear and imposter syndrome every time of, what if I don't do this idea justice with the stuff I put around it? But you just have to do it. You just have to keep going and be like, okay, I've done a really, really good chorus. I should probably write the verse now. Yes. Even I really don't want to, because I've got my dopamine, I've written a sick chorus, and I can go and leave it forever now.
Yeah.
I'm more and more don't want to leave those songs to just die on a hard drive somewhere. Got to finish them up.
Yeah. So you're quite active on social media, and as a kind of part of that, one of your songs somewhat went viral. You've got over 1 million streams on your song. So kind of tell us a little bit about kind of that, because I was saying before the interview, you've got a good audience of those of us that know about you, but then you've got this one song that gosh off.
So this is actually a really funny story, because it was actually nothing to do with social media.
Okay.
To be honest, so that song, Heaviness, it was a song on my album that I released, my debut album in 2021, and I pretty much did everything wrong when it came to promoting that song and that album. I released only 2 singles from the album, and the one that did really well wasn't even a single, Heaviness. Despite being like probably the headline song, not just in streams, but because the album is called An Investigation into Perceived Heaviness, and that song is called Heaviness. I don't know why I didn't release it as a single. I didn't do a whole lot of social media promotion at the time. I'm active on social media now, but I wasn't doing nearly as good a job back then. Basically, all that happened is when the album was about to come out, I, for whatever reason, decided to pitch that one song to the Spotify editors who curate all the playlists, instead of one of the singles, because you can only do one at a time. And something in me was like, I'm not going to push that single, I'm going to push Heaviness. And no one had heard of me, tiny artist. I mean, I still am, apart from that one song. They decided to put it on the biggest or like one of the biggest metal editorials when the album came out, and at the time it had 500,000 followers.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I kind of did everything wrong when it came to that song, because I didn't really promote it that well. I didn't even release it as a single. When I submitted it to the Spotify editors, I didn't even write a good pitch. I was just being funny. I think I wrote too many riffs, angry, and that was it. And you're meant to like write out the process about writing the song. What does it mean to you? Tell us about what some things that happen in the studio. And I was like, yeah, it's too many riffs. And really, that is that song. It was the last song I wrote on the album. I kept trying to write a chorus and I accidentally writing riffs instead. And so I think there's 4 or 5 distinct different riffs in that song and no chorus. So it's just like, it's everything you're not meant to do. And I just got really fortunate, and it did really well. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, so we have to finish off this interview now, but for our listeners who might like that more heavy metal sort of stuff and your sort of style of music, where can they find you?
You can find me on all the socials as LIONFIGHT Music. You can also type LIONFIGHT into Spotify, Apple Music, all your favourite streaming distributors, and you should find my lovely mug staring right back at you.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining us, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on.